Okay.
Okay, let us get underway. Hello. Apologies again for my tardiness. Not starting off on the right foot, and I thoroughly apologize because this is a really this is a pleasure for me. It feels like going full circle in some ways, although we have a much longer journey ahead of us. But it feels like it's becoming full circle because this organization. The idea of it was conceived in the Green Party of California's electoral reform working group. At the time, I was just an independent activist and hoping to learn more about electoral systems and electoral reform. And the Green Party was home for me for a little while. I'm no longer registered with the Green Party, largely because as executive director of ProRep Coalition, which is a coalition of multiple parties working to enable multi-party democracy in California, I can't show preference. But I'm so glad that the Green Party has consistently been open to electoral reform. Um, and I'm incredibly grateful to have the Green Party of California in our coalition. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in California to make electoral reform a reality. And I'm also going to present a few ideas of how you all, depending on where you are in the United States, can start considering our state legislatures as a laboratory of democracy. And I encourage you to begin thinking about how we can really start experimenting with the electoral system in each of our states in a way that positively impacts the people affected by it. So that is the people in your state and the multiple stakeholders in each of our democracies. So just to share a little bit more about ProRep Coalition, we're a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to enable multi-party democracy in California through education and coalition building for proportional representation. Although ProRep is focused on California, the point of this presentation is to discuss what proportional representation, I'm also going to use the acronym PR or ProRep. I'm going to discuss what PR is in a general sense. So the first portion will discuss PR nationally, and then we'll share a little bit more about our efforts in California towards the end. By the time we've wrapped, we'll hopefully have answered 4 questions. First, why do we need political parties? Second, why are politics today so dysfunctional? Third, what is proportional representation and how does it lead to multi-party democracy? And fourth, if we have 2 parties now and we want multiple parties, how do we get from point A to point B? Okay, so first up, why do we need political parties? This does not totally apply to the attendees in this call today, but when talking about political parties within the electoral reform community and even among a lot of the general public, there's a general disdain for parties. They're divisive, they're polarizing, they prevent things from getting done. Okay, so if parties are an issue, what if we just got rid of them? What would that look like? Chances are things will get pretty chaotic pretty quickly. And that's because fundamentally, what political parties are in a representative democracy are tools that allow voters to organize themselves. To demonstrate, I want to do a little exercise. Thinking about the upcoming election, picture the 2 candidates running for president. Uh, what are their names in particular? Just try to remember that. I take it everybody here hopefully can. But going a level deeper, thinking about our congressional elections, I want everyone to picture who the candidates are that are running in that election and what are their names. Going one level deeper, I want everybody to picture the candidates running in their upcoming state assembly or state senate election, or better yet, who is your current state assembly person that's representing you in your state legislature? if you're like most Americans, those questions are incredibly difficult to answer. So let me ask another set of questions. Who are the parties that are running in your local congressional election? And who are the parties that you've historically worked for in your state assembly or state senate elections? Uh, who did you vote for in the last state assembly election? Who did you vote for in the one before that? When it comes to the parties. The point of this exercise is to acknowledge and to recognize that candidates come and go, but parties remain. As voters, especially in non-presidential elections, like for state assembly or state senate, we use parties to learn which candidates we align with the most. They're the foundations of representation in our representative democracy. So we need political parties. There isn't a single advanced democracy in the world today that doesn't rely on political parties. But when reflecting on America's two-party system, it's difficult to not feel like things are severely broken. Bringing us to the second question, why are politics today so dysfunctional? Over the last few decades in the United States, our two political parties have become nearly fully polarized. They consistently vote along party lines and rarely function in a bipartisan manner. With only two fully polarized parties to choose from, and thus only two political vehicles for voters to organize themselves, we've entered a new zero-sum era of American politics. Representation for one group comes at the expense of another. That means without the opportunity for bipartisan support, the policies created by the party in power are often viewed as harming the interests of the party out of power. This has increased political division, resulted in escalating political violence, and as demonstrated in these graphs, eroded partisans' perceptions of one another. When it comes to politics, Americans are losing our ability to cooperate with each other. Our two-party system is tearing us apart. And the thing is, while our rising political division may seem like a temporary fluke in a system that otherwise works fine, the system is actually working exactly how it's intended to. And as bad as this upcoming election is, things are probably only going to get worse. See, even though partisan polarization has become more visible over the last few decades, the two parties have gradually been drifting apart for almost 75 years. For example, the center image shows elected lawmakers' tendencies to vote on bipartisan legislation. In 1951, our representatives used to work together to enact policy. Democrats would support Republican bills they believed in, and vice versa. Fast forward to 2011, when this graph was made, and we can see that maybe a dozen lawmakers actually crossed the political aisle to support legislation championed by the other party. The two parties have nearly completely diverged, and the opportunity for collaboration and compromise is almost non-existent. Enter the doom loop. As the two parties continue to diverge, the stakes of our politics start to feel higher and more emotional, which results in the two parties seeing each other as existential threats, leading to the creation of bubbles and echo chambers wherein the other side is totally cut off, leaving us with a toxic, zero-sum, us versus them political culture of conflict, gridlock, and dysfunction. And this dysfunction isn't lost on voters. A record low percentage of Americans, 28%, are satisfied with how democracy is working. So where do we go from here? Do we move away from democracy and towards a more authoritarian form of government? Or do we fight to improve and reform our democracy? Reflecting on this upcoming election, both parties campaign rhetoric that democracy is on the ballot and that the fate of our country is at stake. They're both right. However, the solution to our country's crisis of democracy isn't one party beating the other. It's changing the system that fosters such toxic binary thinking. So
Caledon.
yeah,
Sorry, the button. I just saw someone, Nassim has just asked, please reshare screen. So
okay.
yeah, sorry to butt in.
No, no, no. Let me try to do this relatively quickly. Was it difficult to see that, the screen?
I was seeing it, but I was seeing it, but I don't know that others. Anyway, it looks like things are okay now.
Okay, okay, good. Well, I hope that you guys can see the screen. Otherwise, there's a lot of talking and not a lot of visuals accompanying it. Can we get a heads up? I see Julie and D Platt, if you can see the slide.
Yeah, I could always see it. So
I can see this.
whoever can't see it probably should say.
Okay.
I can see the slide, but I can't read anything on it. So that'll have to be described, obviously.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Adam. There's probably a few of these that are inconvenient for you. But okay.
Caledon, just wanted
Yes.
to let everybody know, for some reason the screen share closed, but there is a button if you are actually seeing this on a laptop or your desktop. There is a button at the very top frame that says Caledon Myers screen. I had to click on that to regain the screen share. So if for anybody who's lost it, you might try that. Right at the
Okay.
top of the black bar at the very top of the Zoom window, it says Caledon Myers screen. If I click on it, when I clicked on it, it came back.
Okay, thank you, Nassim. Hopefully, I think everyone else has access to it, but if I don't have that button on my screen, as you can see, but um, hopefully that everyone else has access. And if you don't, please speak up. Okay, just gonna move on here. So, where did we leave off? What do we want our democracy to look like in 30 years? Do we want to continue with the status quo of having two parties that refuse to get along? Or do we want to transition to a multi-party democracy that fosters cooperation and collaboration? Let's assume the latter, that we all want to move towards a multi-party democracy. How do we do that? To answer, we first need to understand why America only has two parties to begin with. We have two parties because of our electoral system. What is our electoral system? Well, to provide some context, I'm assuming mostly everyone here is familiar with America's key democratic institutions. We have three branches of government: the executive, judicial, and legislative branches. We have a separation of powers, a constitution, a Bill of Rights, a bicameral legislature. But what's equally, if not more important than each of these is a hidden institution that was put in place during our country's founding and hasn't changed since: our electoral system. The rules that govern our elections and determine how votes are translated into seats are referred to as electoral systems. The type of electoral system a country or state uses plays a profound role in shaping the political life of its democracy. Among many impacts, electoral systems are largely responsible for determining how many parties represent voters. There are two types of electoral systems used by most of the world's democracies to elect their legislatures: winner-take-all systems, which tend to produce legislatures dominated by two major parties, and proportional representation, which produces multi-party legislatures. In the United States, as you may have guessed, we use a winner-take-all system. The person who gets the most votes wins. There's supposed to be a little... There it is, okay. Person who gets the most votes wins. That's how our winner-take-all system works. The key mechanism within winner-take-all systems that results in two-party politics is the use of single-member districts. See, technically, we do have a multi-party system. There are plenty of green, libertarian, and other alternative parties that are constantly competing in elections. However, their ability to actually win is rendered nearly impossible due to the arena they're competing in, the single-member district. With single-member districts, since there's only one seat up for grabs in an election, a single winner, and the only way to win is to simply get the most votes, then any third party trying to earn representation will take votes away from the side closest to it. This is called the spoiler effect. This type of electoral system creates a political climate that discourages voters from selecting candidates they genuinely prefer. Instead, voters are forced to settle for candidates from the major parties they feel are most likely to win, the lesser of two evils. In turn, political diversity is forced into a left and right partisan binary, leaving voters with only two ways of expressing their political preferences. Aside from the lack of choice for voters, using winner-take-all elections in a fully polarized two-party system also harbors conflict and resentment between the parties. I already mentioned this, but when representation for one group comes at the expense of the other, elections become exercises of winning and domination rather than what they can and should be in a representative democracy, exercises in reflection and cooperation. Fortunately, in most democracies around the world, especially most advanced democracies, that's exactly what elections are, exercises in reflection and cooperation. And that's because most advanced democracies use proportional representation and have multiple parties that are encouraged to work together when representing our interests in government. So there's a path forward for the United States if we want to escape the two-party doom loop. So let's unpack that. What is proportional representation and how does it lead to multi-party democracy? Proportional representation is the other primary type of electoral system alongside winner-take-all that is used by most of the world's democracies. In fact, as the political science of electoral system design has progressed over the last 30 years, most of the democracies that have redesigned their electoral systems have increasingly chosen to use some form of full or mixed proportional representation. Here's what it is. Proportional representation refers to a type of electoral system that distributes legislative seats to political parties in proportion to the amount of votes they receive in an election. It's the simple idea that a share of votes gets you a share of seats. For example, if a political party earns 30% of the vote in an election using proportional representation, they then earn 30% of the seats in the legislature. Similar to how the key mechanism that enables a two-party system is the use of the single-member district, the key mechanism that enables multi-party democracy is the usage of multi-member districts. The proportional system in this example uses three-member districts. So of the four parties that ran in the latest election, 3 of them earned enough votes to earn a seat. So there's representatives from the green, blue, and red parties serving this district in the larger legislature. A clear example of our winner-take-all elections restricting political representation can be found in Massachusetts' congressional delegation. Despite earning 30% of the vote in the last election, Republicans have been completely shut out from representing their voters. While in some states, such a lopsided victory for one party could be attributed to gerrymandering, which is the drawing of district lines to advantage one party over the other, Massachusetts uses a politically independent body to redraw their district maps. So this case of one-party domination is purely a result of our winner-take-all elections. But what if Massachusetts used proportional representation to elect its 9 members of Congress? Instead of selecting representatives from 9 single-member districts, with PR, the state could be divided into 3 multi-member districts, with each selecting 3 representatives. By doing so, in addition to Republican and Democratic voters receiving fair representation in proportion to their support, PR would foster a more competitive political climate for a few alternative parties to blossom as well. Which then begs the question, why do we need more alternative parties, and why do we need multi-party democracy? Most large modern democracies left the single winner district system behind over the past couple of centuries. In its place, about 80% of the world's advanced democracies now use some form of proportional representation. The reason most democracies have switched to PR is because when comparing it to our winner-take-all elections, PR presents a range of benefits. Most of those benefits stem from the fact that proportional representation produces multi-party democracy. And to us, the benefits of multi-party democracy fall into 5 categories. First, it does a better job reflecting our diversity. Second, multi-party democracy better represents our interests. Third, it incentivizes legislative collaboration and compromise. Fourth, it creates more responsive policies. And fifth, it marginalizes radical and extreme political actors. Let's talk a little more about each of these, in particular, the first 2. Okay. First, proportional representation does a better job reflecting our diversity. The United States is one of the most diverse countries in the history of the world. Yet, for a large part of our existence, both voting and political representation has been reserved to land-owning white men. While that's no longer legally the case, women and communities of color continue to face disadvantages that make running for office especially challenging, which is why there's a disproportionately larger number of white men serving in elected positions. Now, there's no silver bullet for increasing and improving representation for women and communities of color, but here's what we do know about how PR can help. When it comes to women's representation, countries that use PR elect more women to their national legislatures with an average of 29% than countries that use winner-take-all elections with an average of 22%. In addition, countries that have switched from winner-take-all elections to proportional representation have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of women elected. For example, in New Zealand's last winner-take-all election in 1990, only 13% of elected representatives were women. But in 2020, a few decades after PR was introduced in 1993, 51% of elected representatives were women. When it comes to reflecting our multiracial society, let's consider what that looks like in our 2-party system. One party values racial justice, equity, and representation, and the other party doesn't as much or in a similar degree. PR would improve representation for communities of color by offering them more parties to choose from. So instead of just having one party that clearly values diverse representation, in a 6-party system, there would likely be 3 or 4 parties that do, but to different degrees. More parties creates more dynamic opportunities for communities of color to select candidates that reflect their communities. The next benefit, proportional representation and multi-party democracy does a much better job representing our interests and ideologies than our winner-take-all 2-party system. So remember, political parties are tools that allow voters to organize themselves within our democracy. When there's only 2 parties to cooperate, to choose from, and both refuse to cooperate with one another, representation for one group comes at the expense of another. In doing so, complex ideologies are oversimplified and reduced to an us versus them binary. And that leaves voters with only 2 ways to express their preferences in any given election. But in multi-party democracies with proportional representation, voters have multiple choices. They don't need to resort to selecting the lesser of two evils and can vote for a party they more honestly align with. Right now in the US, if you identify as a liberal, you pretty much have one option, the Democratic Party. In a multi-party democracy, the political spectrum is much more diverse, and the question of politics isn't as simple as, are you liberal or conservative? Rather, it's how liberal or how conservative are you, and in which ways? With multiple parties to choose from, voters have more opportunities to select a party that actually aligns with and represents their political preferences. The last three benefits: multi-party democracy incentivizes legislative collaboration and compromise, results in more responsive policymaking, and marginalizes extremism. They're all somewhat interconnected. So the first, PR incentivizes collaboration and compromise. Since PR results in multi-party legislatures, single-party majorities are rare. Instead, multiple parties are compelled to work together and must form coalitions in order to build the majorities necessary to create and pass legislation. That need to collaborate through coalitions produces the next benefit: more responsive policies. Policy responsiveness refers to the ability of the government to create legislation that addresses voters' critical needs and diverse preferences. Responsiveness comes from a combination of competition and collaboration. With more parties competing for voters, there's more of an incentive for candidates to craft a platform that aligns with voters' needs. When they're actually elected, that incentive to align continues into policymaking. Representatives need to keep the campaign promises they've made. And with a multi-party legislature that requires coalition building, legislation is only pushed through when there's broad consensus across parties, which ensures that all voices are heard across the political spectrum. The last benefit, PR marginalizes extremism, is best explained through the counterfactual. It's probably safe to say here that Donald Trump represents an authoritarian threat to our democracy. So how did he end up taking over an entire political party twice? It's because he's consistently been able to consolidate support from the radical base of the Republican Party, while more moderate presidential candidates split their votes competing to beat him. Forced to remain united, the platform and behavior of the party then evolves to reflect the platform and behavior of its leader. So in this, we see that two-party systems are actually more susceptible to authoritarian takeovers than multi-party systems. And just to be clear, all democracies have radical voices and factions, but in democracies with PR and multiple parties, those factions are marginalized and exist in their own smaller parties. They're unable to co-opt a major party's election and radicalize their agenda. Once elected, the other parties are also less likely to work with the extremist parties due to their views, which further marginalizes them and prevents them from gaining power. That's why a lot of the world's advanced democracies using PR to elect their legislatures, like New Zealand, Germany, and Taiwan, they've proven to be incredibly resilient to the recent wave of global authoritarianism. That's a lot of benefits, but if it wasn't enough, don't take our word for it. As our democratic crisis worsens, momentum for proportional representation is growing fast. Political scientists, democracy scholars, and a new wave of advocates are beginning to coalesce and raise awareness for what many see as the most promising solution to our significant, long-standing two-party problems. Proportional representation is simply a better way of doing democracy. All right, so I want to briefly stop there for 5 to 10 minutes and answer any questions that might have come up from the first part of that presentation. And then the second part, which I'll take 10 or 15 minutes to go over, we'll talk about how to advance, how ProRep Coalition is going about our advocacy in California, what's been successful, what hasn't, and also what you all can do to begin advocating for PR in your respective states. So happy to answer any questions that may have come up, and we'll start with Adam because I know that you're going to have some difficulty pressing the hand raising button. Adam, was there any questions that you had?
I just know myself because in Utah, it seems like even though there's a huge, like in Salt Lake City and the Salt Lake Valley, there's a lot of people who are Democrats, but but the state that I live in, that like the governor's, it's been a Republican for quite a long time. There's been a few Democrat governors before, but most of the time it seems like it's pretty much, if you know what I'm saying, and the thing that I personally have felt like we didn't have the electoral college at all, because it seems like even if a lot of people vote one way or the other, for example, it seems like the electoral college kind of makes their vote, and their vote kind of trumps what you're doing, if you know what I'm saying. Over.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I think I picked up most of what you were laying down there. Curious to learn more about Utah. I'll have to look into that. Any other questions, comments, or should we just keep on rolling here? Oh, yeah. Don.
I was wondering if gerrymandering can be effective in multi-seat districts.
Really great question. No, and here's the evidence. When you look at countries that are using proportional representation and you say, hey, do you guys have gerrymandering? They say, what? What is that word? That we've never heard of that. Gerrymandering is a unique problem within single member districts because essentially it's the act of not candidates choosing their representatives, but constituents choosing their representatives, but representatives choosing their constituents. They're redrawing the district boundaries in a way that's going to give them an electoral advantage. So that advantage is winning representation for everyone in that district. But if you have multi-member districts, there's no way one person can win all of the representation. So you're removing that incentive to manipulate district boundaries. So essentially what proportional representation does is it renders gerrymandering useless. You can't do it. Nasim.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation, Caledon. Always glad to hear about the progress that ProRep is making. Well, 2 points I wanted to make a comment about how you describe the two parties. I mean, from a Green perspective, because we are not like the typical voter in the United States, we don't see those two parties as being really divided. We see them as being divisive among their constituents, but they are certainly not divided in policy. They are not polar in implementation of populist policies versus what their corporate owners force them to do. So that's one, I would say, point that when you talk to disenfranchised parties, they probably, most of them, see the two main corporate parties as being very united, two wings of the same bird, essentially. But I also had a question about implementation of proportional representation across the US. I don't mean nationally, but there are many people from different states here. Do you have an idea how many of them allow voter referendums, or is that not very typical in most states?
26 states do, and I'm going to review that in this next section. And Nasim, as you know, always a pleasure. Nasim was one of the very first people to really help this get off the ground. And Nasim, you've consistently brought this point up, and it's an excellent point that I should definitely add to the deck. And that's, yeah, you're right. When it comes to economic policy, the two parties aren't that different at all. Generally, what we've seen over the last 20 years is that taxes for the rich go down significantly with a Republican government, and then Democrats will raise it up a little bit when they're elected again, but it's not returning to the same levels that it was prior to when the Republicans cut it. So what you see is a gradual decline in corporate and taxes for the mega wealthy, and taxes actually increasing, and the cost of living increasing, and the economic inequality increasing throughout the country, and mainly for the people who are worst off. So that polarization between the two parties, that's largely applies to social and identity issues. And that distracts us a lot, because when we think that one group is, based on their identities, is working in a way that's against another group, that's preventing us from acknowledging that we have major problems that affect everyone, regardless of your identity. So that polarization and that division that the two parties use to separate us by our identities, really, that prevents us from seeing what they do share in common, which is not that much of an interest in helping the working class and the people who don't have as many opportunities available to them. So Nasim, I need to start baking that into this a little bit. Thank you for bringing it up. Craig.
Thanks, Caledon. So in New Jersey, the machine works together. Both parties work together. In a lot of counties, you actually have the Republican chair of the county committee reporting to the Democratic chair. You have in Hudson County one party rule, which is Democratic. In Passaic County, you have Republican predominant majority rule there. It all depends on each municipality, even down all the way down. You'll see one side tilt the other. You'll see people switching affiliation to try to jump on the chain and train to win whatever the race is. So when I run for council, I try to, run for where there's multiple seats up for grabs. And I'll just say, hey, look, try to cast your vote for me and then choose your two others that you normally would support. And that appeals to a lot of people. I was pulling more Republican votes than even Democratic votes when I did that last 2 years ago. And for New Jersey to be recognized, for us to officially be a major party in New Jersey, we would need to receive a certain percentage of votes in a state assembly race. So our ideal goal for the state of New Jersey is to run a green in the state assembly where there's two seats, and try to pull and say, look, you want the Green Party to be a major party, choose your green in your district, and then obviously choose your major party candidate that you normally support, just to try to shake up the system. This is the approach we're trying to. It's obviously we would need 40 candidates to commit to this and take this message forward. But it's the state assembly in New Jersey that we need to crack through to be recognized as a major party here. Over.
Thanks, Craig. Also an excellent point. And to kind of summarize it, I think it's fair to say that winner-take-all elections in the two-party system manifest differently in each state. So in California, we've had prolonged one-party rule where the Democrats have had a supermajority for 60 of the last 65 years. So they don't need to work with Republicans in order to enact any policies, but there's still 34% of our state's households are struggling to meet their basic needs. So they have the ability to address these problems, but they're not, because there's not an incentive to, because there's no competition, and they're not threatened by the Republicans or any other alternative parties. So that's what we're trying to change here. And as we'll get into briefly, our route to reform and our theory of change revolves around a ballot initiative. But actually, Craig, in New Jersey, electoral reform efforts, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So what's going to work in California might not work in New Jersey. So it's important that advocates in Jersey and California are aware of the different menu of options you have at your disposal. And there's a new reform called fusion voting. Well, it's not new. The advocacy efforts for it are new. But I actually think that they're doing something in New Jersey. So I'll share my email at the end of this. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I'd be happy to connect you. They're good folks over there. They're working with the Working Families Party as well. But that's a different thing than PR. It's just we have to do what we can where we can. Which kind of leads to the next portion here, which I'll try to deliver this relatively quickly, and we're off on time a little bit, but we'll definitely take some more questions shortly. Okay. All right. So all of the evidence points to proportional representation being a better system. Most people generally, at least in California, 72% of voters believe more parties are needed. So how can we transition from winner-take-all elections to proportional representation? For starters, you got to consider the opportunities for reform available to us. So since PR strictly functions as a system for electing legislative bodies, it can't be used for executive offices like president, governor, or mayor. So that leaves Congress, our 50 state legislatures, and local government elections as potential settings for adopting PR. So between those three, there's more than 87,000 elections for us to consider. So to narrow that list down, it's important to clarify the goal that we're seeking through electoral reform. At ProRep, our goal is multi-party democracy, which PR produces. So since that's our goal, which of these three different settings hold partisan elections? Most local government elections in the US are nonpartisan. So although PR can provide some benefits, the problems facing local elections aren't partisan by nature. So that leaves elections for our federal and state legislatures. At the federal level, it's probably safe to say that adopting PR in either the House or Senate is most reformers' ultimate goal. It would be revolutionary. But doing so requires a repeal of the Uniform Congressional Districting Act, which in 1967 codified in federal law the universal use of single-member districts. So if we were to repeal that, which would require passage in both the House and the Senate, that essentially means that the route to reform is muddied by the very polarization it's aimed to address. Oh, Nassim, I see your hand is raised. Was that from before? Okay. Okay, so although PR at the federal level is possible, at the moment, as grassroots organizers, there's not a whole lot we can do. And convincing lawmakers to change the rules of the game that they're actively winning is like giving an axe to a tree and asking it to cut itself down. It's not likely. So that leaves our state legislatures. Of our 50 state legislatures, 26 have forms of direct democracy that allow citizens to enact or repeal laws without the support of the governor or legislature. So state legislatures are also partisan institutions. Unlike local elections, wherein city council members and school board members are nonpartisan, every single one of the US's state legislatures is made up entirely of Republicans and Democrats. So between the three potential election settings that offer opportunities to adopt PR, as grassroots organizers with the goal of transitioning to a multi-party democracy, focusing on our state legislatures presents the most potential. And that's what we're doing. Allow me to reintroduce ourselves. ProRep Coalition is a nonprofit with a mission to enable multi-party democracy in California through education and coalition building for proportional representation. I've actually already reviewed some of these stats, but to us, this helps articulate what's motivating us to work on California? And there's just a few reasons. First, we care about it. We're a fully independent California-based group of advocates, and we believe that adopting PR in California will create a more democratic and representative government. Another reason why California, we're aware of the impact that this change, adopting it here, would have on the rest of the country. As the saying goes, as goes California, so goes the nation. Another reason why, you know what, I'm going to skip the reasons why because we're short on time here. And I kind of already listed both of these, but the overview is we have the means and resources to start addressing some of the most profound obstacles that our country faces. We have the 5th largest economy in the world and more wealth here than 95% of the rest of the planet. So the fact that we have 34% of our households not earning enough income to meet their basic needs, there's a major systemic problem there. And it stems from poor political representation. And we know that because, as mentioned, the Democrats have had almost a supermajority in the California state legislature for more than 60 years, but they haven't enacted a lot of the campaign promises that they've shared. So we do need a more competitive political ecosystem that results in more responsive policies and reduces that 34% to ideally, I mean, as close to zero as possible. All right, so how do we actually get proportional representation in California? We have a 4-step theory of change. First, over the next few years, as a 501c3 solely focused on public education, we need to raise awareness of proportional representation. One advantage that we have that other reforms don't is that we focus on the deliverable outcomes of reform rather than the mechanisms of the reform itself. The key outcome of PR we're championing is that it produces multi-party democracy. We're focusing on multi-party democracy because, frankly, most people aren't aware of electoral systems or electoral system design. And you can't really blame them. It's complicated, far removed from most political conversations, and remarkably unsexy. So we need to meet people where they are, which is dissatisfied with our politics and unhappy with our increasingly hostile two-party system. In addition to public education, we're also actively building a coalition to support proportional representation in our state. There exists a variety of parties and groups in California that already support PR, but up until recently, that support has been fractured because there hasn't been an opportunity for supporters to coalesce. And that's where we come in. We're the electoral reform vehicle that allows coalition members to travel together. So far, we've created the first formal multi-party coalition in the US in nearly 40 years, with a total of 475,000 registered voters among just the ballot qualified parties in the coalition, including the Green Party of California. On top of that, we've recruited some of the leading electoral system design experts in the country and are working with a few notable thought leaders to really provide extra legitimacy and credibility to what we're doing here. We're going to continue recruiting for the coalition, but in the years to come, thanks to our next step in our theory of change, we know what the destination of our electoral reform vehicle is. A 2028 ballot initiative, which will be spearheaded by a new 501c4 organization affiliated with ProRep. The 4th step in our theory of change is the change, provided we effectively educate the public about the benefits and promise of multi-party democracy, build a robust coalition that participates in these efforts, and gather enough petition signatures and votes to pass the initiative, we fully anticipate that in 2028, California will become the first multi-party US state. And ideally, our success will provide a template for reform for other states to emulate, leading to a wave of proportional representation across the country. So that's our theory of change, and so far it's been received quite well. We have 17 parties and nonprofits as coalition members, and we brought all of them together with no financial or institutional support. So what we're doing is working. A few years ago, PR was considered a moonshot reform, and today it's gathering grassroots momentum faster than any other reform in the country. So what can you do in your respective states to start getting proportional representation off the ground? You know, I don't think we're going to go into these breakout rooms because, again, my apologies. I was tardy for my own presentation, so we might not have time. But I just want to briefly talk about this. So I'll be honest, getting ProRep Coalition to where we are now took a tremendous amount of time and unpaid work that our team was incredibly lucky enough to have. And not everyone is going to be as fortunate as us. And nor are we encouraging anyone to start a nonprofit from scratch to advance a ballot initiative for PR in your state. That's a big lift, to say the least. But what you can do is this. Start connecting with others in your state that are interested in proportional representation. A reform of this scale is too big for any one person to try to champion alone. And in order to start working towards it, the first step is to start having conversations with others that are also interested in PR. So you don't need to know which direction to head in, but by working with others, you can learn together which ways you could start meaningfully advocating for proportional representation. So at this point, we would break out into breakout rooms, but again, I unfortunately don't think we have the time for that. So I would be happy, I would love to hear other people's thoughts and answer any questions that you may have about proportional representation. And then also would love to hear if you think that it's possible in your state. D. Platt.
Hello. Yeah, I'm here in New York. So we don't have a state referendum process, but I'm discussing with a voting reform nonprofit guy named Matt. He's championing star voting, but I was talking about how PR fits with that as far as star voting or better ranked, not ranked choice, but something even like more weighty for single, like executives, single person districts, but not district, but office, but still having multi-seat districts for everything else, especially legislators, is a sort of way of communicating with those that are maybe skeptical of completely legislative power-based politics. Because as far as I'm concerned, get rid of executives. We don't need them. But he mentions that here in New York, we still do have home rules laws that allow us to have a referendum process for local legislation. Now, in all my lifetime, in all the history of Albany, New York, I've never heard of such a process being used, but that's because we're such a machine city. I suppose no activist has ever even attempted it, and no one has still used it, even though the machine isn't what it used to be, since politics shifted in the neoliberal direction, finally. And then that's interesting, that when a Rust Belt city, neoliberal politics is actually an improvement over what we had. So I guess over. So I just want to point out that possibility in those gray states on that map. Though I've yet to truly confirm, but he apparently is sharing some documentation with me that it is confirmed.
Yeah, no, that's very exciting. A lot of electoral reform organizations have a longer term strategy of adopting the reforms that they'd like to see at the state and federal level at the local level first, because it's much more actionable and accessible. And to your point, like New York has these specific opportunities that allow you to advance reforms at the local level. And I guess I just should mention, like, yes, you know, do what you can where you can. From our point of view, we fully support all voting method reforms, including RCV approval and star voting. And there's an expression in the electoral reform movement: let 1,000 flowers bloom. So again, we don't need to have a one-size-fits-all solution. We should be using our legislatures and our communities as laboratories of democracy and experiment and innovate to learn which system is really going to represent our interests the best.
Adam Stack.
Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I really like the it's called range choice voting. It's where you basically are kind of ranking each of the candidates, but at the same time, you're actually giving one candidate either a 0 through 9. And I've actually done a little bit of that before, and I think it's a lot fair, because you actually give each person a specific rating. Over.
Yes, we're very familiar with ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting, so just to kind of categorize and help describe the differences between proportional ranked choice voting, or proportional representation and ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is a voting method, and proportional representation is an electoral reform. So what we mean by that is, in being a voting method, you're not fundamentally changing how votes are translated into seats. What you're doing is changing how voters actually select their preferred candidates. So how we have it now, it's single choice. But with ranked choice voting, you got to rank all of the candidates. And fundamentally, when the votes are tallied, it's a vote moderating device that ultimately removes the spoiler effect, but also increases the chances of the more moderate candidates, most likely those from the major parties, winning. And within single member districts and executive elections, it's a good reform. It's a step in the right direction. But if we want a robust multi-party democracy, then we need proportional representation. There's no ifs, buts, or ands. Just from a comparative politics perspective, all the countries that have multi-party legislatures all use proportional representation.
Well, no, I mean, what I meant was range, not rank. Range, RANGE, choice voting. It's a little bit different than ranked choice voting.
Oh, I'll have to look into that. That sounds interesting.
That's a little bit similar to, I think this is probably not a good description, but if you're familiar with approval voting, it might fall somewhere into the spectrum of that type of approach. I think if is that correct? Would you say, Adam?
Yeah, if you were to, I don't know if you know who Brendan Phillips is. He's someone who's been part of the Green Party in Utah before. He actually explained it really good a long time ago to me, but it's hard to remember everything he said. But I just know that there's a candidate's name on the left side of the ballot, and then they go from top to bottom, and then there's a set of circles, and you either choose 0 through 9, and so you give the person, you fill in each circle up to wherever you want. You know, you fill the first one in, that's 0, or you fill them all in up to 9, and then it's calculated that way.
Yeah, so it's similar to that. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there for people who might be wondering. Anyway, over.
Thanks, Holly. Nassim.
Thank you. I think you may have mentioned this earlier, but it's when people tell us or try to maybe object or focus on the method of voting, it's important for us when we're trying to advocate for proportional representation to discuss that that is a fundamental change in the way we elect representatives. It's not a method of voting, it's a different electoral system. And within ranked choice voting, I think you mentioned this slightly, Caledon, there can be different methods of voting within proportional representation, and different countries use that. So for example, often people ask, well, what would my ballot look like if we have proportional representation? And, you know, it may have the party, you decide on your party, and then you have a list of candidates which you rank within the party you chose. Or it may be a closed system. But that's what's interesting, is a lot of times discussions focus on the method of voting, because in the US, we're not familiar with any other electoral type of representation other than winner take all. We just take that for granted. So a lot of these methods are used around the world in different ways to vote. However, with some type of proportional representation as the electoral method, not the voting method. So those two are the combination that we have to come up with, which Caledon, I think you mentioned, like for each jurisdiction, for each country, it might be a very specific mix, a formula that works best for them, even with the states in our country. So that's good to keep in mind. So when people say, no, proportional representation isn't good, we should have ranked choice voting, the idea is often you can have both. They're situated at two different levels of electoral representation.
Thank you, Naseem. Excellent clarification. That's PR. This is PR 101. That's PR 200. It's the next step up. There are a lot of varieties of proportional representation. And to Naseem's point, there isn't one that's going to work for everyone, but we should be selecting which is going to work best in our different communities by engaging the communities themselves. And that's what we're doing at ProRep for California. Dawn.
I was wondering how the initiative would define the changes in the number of districts statewide, the size of the districts, and the total numbers of representatives.
Yeah, so one of the things that we say at ProRep is that we're not presenting a product for people's endorsement. We're presenting a process for their participation. So when it comes to determining the features of a ballot initiative, which to your point would include electoral threshold and district magnitude and some of the more specific complex mechanisms within a PR system, we want to engage multiple communities. We want to engage our grassroots coalition. We want to engage the academic community and the legal community as well, because there's going to be restrictions around what we can actually put on the ballot. So our job is to create that multi-step dynamic process that allows the multiple stakeholders in our democracy to work together and figure out what's going to work best in California. So we don't have the details for the ballot initiative yet, and we won't anytime soon, because it's not coming from us. It's not top down, we're bottom up. And again, creating the process to make that decision in a democratic way. And I believe we're at time here. I'm happy to stay on. I don't know what the agenda is for the rest of the day, but also it doesn't look like there's any more questions. So thank you. Oh, yeah, Eugene. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. Tell us how the democratic control of the California electoral system results in co-optation of all efforts to reform it. And I'm referring to the primary system, which from a little bit of knowledge seems to be that the reform resulted in parties like the Green Party to be squeezed out of the primary system. Do you foresee the kinds of ways that co-optation will be directed at your message?
Do I foresee? We're aware of the risks, and we're aware of the fact that this is a fundamental change that virtually nobody within the Democratic Party is going to support. How they choose to present obstacles and challenge us, I don't know. I'm hoping we remain low profile enough for long enough that allows us to organize and get people together so that when they do start attacking and try and prevent this from happening, we've got numbers. But yeah, that one of the reasons we're going through the ballot initiative route is because you don't want the people who are playing the game to be making the rules for the game. So although we are going to try to attract a few independent Democrats and Republicans as individuals to join the coalition, because we're going to need some of their support, we're under no illusion that the Democratic Party is just going to support what we're doing. It's a fundamental it's a dramatic change in our political landscape and our political diversity as well, and that threatens their hold on power. But very good point.
Are there other nations that have gone through a similar process as they have moved toward proportional representation? You know, Europe, etc. I mean, literally over a 30-year period or whatever.
One, New Zealand. And what happened in New Zealand, I mean, I don't think it could be replicated. There were a lot of really peculiar events that took place over a series of years that made reform possible. But no, if we were to get PR adopted in California by way of the ballot initiative, we would be the first state and organization and coalition to ever do so the way that we are. So there's some tactics that we can learn from international experiences, but not a ton, and none that we can mirror identically.
Could you end with your website moniker, please?
Yeah, I'll just type it in there. ProRepCoalition.org. And D Platt. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Dan. I know I didn't type it out because it's Zoom. It's a Zoom account. Anyway, two separate questions. I'll start with the easier one, which is, can you list all the different types of groups that you've recruited so far and groups that you're looking to recruit? The full list of like, okay, who's more open, who would be open, you know, where to start, you know, because I'm always anxious about wasting my time going to a bunch of people who turn out to be actually partisan Democrats, even just lightly partisan. Like they're not partisan, like they're not Democratic Party functionaries, but they're still like, they'll act like it in a pinch because their bread is getting buttered or there's some kind of relationship they have to maintain that would get destroyed and these are good government groups I'm referring to, who usually are, you know, for this stuff until they're not. The second question is Jill Stein's usual story of why she became a Green was she organized a voter referendum process in Massachusetts, which then passed, but then because it had to be implemented by the partisan parties, the major parties, they just decided they wouldn't do it. What then, or like, do you have a forming strategy, or do you just want to get to that point of intransigence first and then decide what to do?
Oh, sure. Let me answer the second question while it's fresh. So California, woohoo, my balloons are going off at them. Unlike Massachusetts, California has probably the most powerful ballot initiative in the country, in that what the citizens want, the citizens get. So long as something gets above 50% of the popular vote, a ballot initiative, it cannot be overturned by the governor or legislature. And I believe that in Massachusetts and a few other states, ballot initiatives that receive majority support also then need to go on and receive majority support in the legislature. So that might be the case in Massachusetts. It sounds like it is, but that isn't the case in California, at least. I hope that answers that question. And then regarding the coalition, so this is the coalition so far. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this started with the Green Party of California. And then we brought together nearly all of the alternative parties in California because the alternative parties have the most to gain from proportional representation. Like everybody is looking for a seat at the table. PR is the reform that guarantees it. So before I even started or joined the electoral reform working group, PR was on the platform of the Green Party of California, as well as the Peace and Freedom Party. So right off the bat, we had people who were interested in this, but what they needed was a coalition. They needed that vehicle to work with others. So there's an interest in supporting our work and us supporting you. Like, so there's just a lot of, it's ripe for a significant partnership. And then so after in California, after we got all the alternative parties together, we started looking at the fellow electoral reform advocacy groups. So we have Californians for Electoral Reform. A lot of these groups are the nonprofits in the democracy reform space. And also to your point, one of the biggest coalition members that we have, a big official organization with 100 staff, is Protect Democracy. And it takes time to build that trust with those larger groups. And what they are doing and why they agreed to join the coalition is because they have legal expertise and are going to support us in the legal side of putting a ballot initiative together, or at least support us as much as they can. So just what I would say is look for the groups that already support proportional representation and look for the ones that naturally would benefit the most from it, and then reach out to them. So hope that answered the question. Oh, Nassim, is your hand raised again, or is that from before as well? Before.
We only have 5 minutes. It'll cut us off automatically.
Okay. In that case, if there's no more questions, please feel free. I'm gonna drop my email in the chat. And if anyone would like to follow up or has additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. But
I was going to say, unfortunately, I can't access the chat either. Is there a way you could send me your email in a text message?
sure.
I can give you my number. I can give you my number real quick.
Are you comfortable giving your number?
Yeah, I don't care.
Setting?
It's 801.
Okay, well, let me write this down. 1 second. 801
915.
Okay.
4003.
Thanks, Adam. I'll text you right when we hang up here.
All right.
Again, thank you so much for the time. My sincerest apologies for being a little late for this presentation, and thank you so much for hanging in there. Yeah, I consider the Green Party a very close organization to my heart, and I hope I didn't let you guys down by being late, and really appreciate you hearing what we're working on. Like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out if you're looking to get in touch, and I'd be happy to hop on a call. So thanks so much, all.
Thank you, and thank everybody for coming.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Caledon. Hi,
Thank you.
Kathy. Hi, Wesson.
So just coming up tonight for those who want to go, there's a 6 o'clock. I think there's a meet and greet, and then I think it's at maybe it's 7 o'clock, and then after that, fundraiser for tonight with Lady Bunny. And
Is the meet and greet free or Because
No,
I'm on a low fixed income,
yeah,
unfortunately.
no, unfortunately, no, and it's a fundraiser, so that's kind of the whole idea.
Uh,
They didn't give out,
okay,
yeah, unfortunately that, but there'll be other things. We'll see you all tomorrow. So have a good evening.
all right.
Thanks, Holly. Bye.
Bye-bye.